Some people in life you just can't get enough of. And that is how I feel about my guest today, which is why he's now my guest for, I think, the third time. His name's Dr. Srini Pillay. He's a real doctor. He's an MD. He is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and he speaks heavily and is highly knowledgeable about neuropsychology. He was talking about this before it became a trending term on social media. So he is truly one of the originators in really exploring this in our current times. In addition to that, he lectures, he consults with companies, and he has something that we're going to be talking about and exploring today, which is the law of awareness. And is the law of awareness just another one of those trending social media terms where people go and look for it because, oh, I got to make my life better, so maybe I just need to be more aware, whatever the heck that means? Well, we're going to find out today with Dr. Srini Pillay. So thank you for coming back again.
Thanks for having me, Dan. And just to clarify, it's actually the law of attraction.
Oh, attraction.
Even more controversial than the thought of awareness, because I think awareness people can buy. But the idea that maybe you can attract things that you want into your life, I think a lot of people think that it's just sort of woo stuff. And what I'd like to do is provide a perspective on ways in which it might not be that way. And my latest course on implementing the science behind the law of attraction sort of guides people on how to implement that module by module. But rather than going to the course, I'd love to know what questions you have about the subject.
The first thing I'd like to do, since we're talking about the law of attraction, not awareness, excuse me, is, these are live takes, no edits. So when the host stumbles, we go with it. Okay, I love the law of attraction, but what I'd like to start with is repelling. Is there an opposite to the law of attraction?
Yes.
Can we repel things in our lives?
Well, absolutely. I think, so just to get a little philosophical and metaphorical about it, most things in life that exist, and specifically what physicists call dark matter and dark energy, we cannot see. 95% of things we cannot see. And so dark matter and dark energy are about bringing things together, attracting, and dark energy about repelling. So attracting and repelling forces exist in the world. In the brain, you might ask, well, is it possible to repel things? Well, at a very obvious level, if you don't like how someone looks or behaves or what they're saying, you might feel like you're repelling that, but you don't want to be repelling what you want. Like if you want a relationship, is it possible that even though you want it so badly, you can't attract it because you're repelling it? And at a very fundamental level, let's say you go on a date and you're thinking, I really want to be able to date this person. And the other person, but you're feeling anxious about it. We have mirror neurons in our brains. So even though you think you might be nice on the outside and saying all the right things, if you have anxiety going on in your brain, you will be making the other person anxious unconsciously, because mirror neurons mirror the emotions in the other person. In that case, that person becomes anxious and they're not really sure why they're anxious, but they are repelled by that, and you are unconsciously repelling that. In addition, when you have something like fear, for example, that takes over the brain, and as you know, in my book, Life Unlocked, I talk a lot about how to
One of my favorites.
I'm glad. But I talk a lot about how when you are afraid, you are actually, you are directing your attention toward threat. And you're looking out for more and more threat. And when you look out for more and more threat, then that's what you see. It's like if you just buy a white car, you might notice that there are a lot of white cars. So similarly, if all you're looking for is threat, you will only see that, and you will be repelling the positive experiences because you're not paying attention to them. So can we repel things? Absolutely. And I believe that a lot of that comes from really the opposite of the principles I teach in the law of attraction, which are fundamentally that we are not aligned in our intentions and in our sense of self and meaning. And when you are not aligned, it becomes very difficult to pursue what you want, to see what you want, to pursue it, and to attract it.
Oh, you said a lot of things. Alignment with intention, which we need to go back to, and you tied anxiety to the law of attraction. So take your pick, which you want to tackle first.
Well, I think that what a lot of people don't realize is when they have an intention, when you have an intention, like I intend to make more money. When you say I intend to make more money, what many studies have shown, and in medicine, there's nothing that's absolute. So that it's not that everything that I say, there's often a counter study for with a lot of caveats. But there's a solid body of research that shows that intentions start activating the brain before you know you have them, which means something is happening in your unconscious that is leading to the intention. And when you realize that you intend to do something, the brain has already decided for you because something unconscious has happened. So if you say, when I said alignment is important, the first thing is that intention is actually strengthened by emotion. A lot of people think thinking is just a cognitive act and it's not connected to emotion. But Antonio Damasio, in his book Descartes' Error, points out that it is not possible to think without emotions being involved. You get excited mathematicians, excited physicists. You can be the most rational thinker, but even rational thought requires emotion. Now, when you add positive...
Okay, hold on. Can I ask you a chicken and egg question?
Sure.
In your medical professional opinion as a psychiatrist, which comes first? Kind of like the chicken or the egg, the thought or the emotion or the thought?
So I don't think this is a hot topic right now. And I think that Dennis Noble is somebody who
we only talk about hot topics. That's why you're here.
Well, the idea of causation in medicine is being debunked gradually. So Dennis Noble, who made the first computational model of a heart cell, actually is very articulate about the fact that there is no way that you can say something started here and then went there when it comes to human biology, because your cells have DNA. The cells are influencing the genes are influencing the cells are influencing the organs, the organism, the whole being, is influencing each organ, and the environment is influencing the organism. And these are two-way interactions all the time. So one thing that I think, popular medical science that's online and on Instagram, it's like, don't eat oxalates, or do this, or don't, because this causes that. The moment anybody brings up the word cause, be suspicious. If there's one thing you take away from this podcast, if someone says something causes something, be suspicious. In fact, I send out a weekly newsletter in which I talk about the mind-body connection. And in one of in the last week of January, I actually sent out a newsletter saying, did you know that your past trauma might be related to the joint pains you feel when you wake up in the morning? And in that case, we don't know what's causing what. Like, you might say, well, the trauma is causing that, but you might also say, well, then why doesn't it cause joint pains in everyone? So it can't actually just be a single cause. It's probably interacting with other factors as well. But in terms of the chicken and egg story, in medicine, I don't think in most situations we can actually determine what a cause is.
It's interesting you talk about that, because years ago I read Ted Morter's work, and I recently interviewed, I haven't aired it yet, or well, maybe by the time we're airing, this will be aired, so look for it, everybody, Dr. Sue Morter, who continued his work about pain we store that is related to emotions, and how, let's say, a chiropractic move coupled with thinking about that moment that maybe we're ashamed of or that we've never expressed out loud, and then adjusting the body at the same time, and it triggers all kinds of emotional releases with people who've experienced it, where they just start crying, and it's like this release, and they feel better, and they don't have the pain anymore, and they've released the guilt at the same time without even ever saying a thing.
Absolutely. I mean, not only are we beginning to understand the connections between the mind and the body, but we're also beginning to understand that the body itself acts like a system. I just posted on Instagram the other day findings from a study that showed that when you work out your quads, it actually causes bicep fatigue on the same side. And so the recommendation
Read
is,
that. That's interesting.
do not do quad and bicep workouts on the same day, which is sort of interesting, because we tend to think of them
It's
as
a
like,
common duo.
right. And so I think, and the reason I'm even sort of showcasing this is that for me, recognizing the multiple connections within the body and between the body and the environment is extremely important. And that's one kind of alignment that you can feel.
Now let's talk about, you have written some very interesting things about attention deficit, anxiety, and the impact of those. How does anxiety, which is a very hot topic, and a lot of people believe they have it, whether medically diagnosed or not, how does that impact the law of attraction?
Well, so in order for the law of attraction,
Actually, can you define the law of attraction for us and then take it to anxiety?
So I think the law of attraction posits that your internal state can be changed such that you can have a greater likelihood of getting what you want without necessarily having some kind of direct effort. Now, the first thing I want to say is, the first thing I said in this interview was that 95% of things cannot be seen. So I don't think the brain is the answer to everything. And I don't think if something can be seen, it means that if something cannot be seen, it means it does not exist. So I don't happen to think that science exists independent of art either. Like, I'm sort of in the process of wanting to just revamp the whole model in medicine, because I feel like we have enough evidence to show that we should start connecting these things. But going back to your question, which is how is it that what is inside can change what is outside? The two examples that I gave earlier are good examples. The first is that if I am holding an emotion, a negative emotion like fear or anger, I'm likely going to cause that in other people, and I'm likely and that's going to come back to me. So I'll be holding not just my fear, but the fear I mirrored in the other person's brain, now amplified in my brain. And that means that it's going to be it will then bias my attention not to look for what I want to attract into my life, or make it much less likely that you will get that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that belief is such an important element when it comes to achieving anything. Now you might say, well, oh, really? But belief is hocus pocus. It means nothing. There's a whole physiology behind belief. Dopamine is a big part of that. The opioid system is a part of that. I'll give you a potent example. When people say, well, belief can't really change anything. Consider the fact that when you have a cough, and if you take something that is thought to be a cough syrup, but it doesn't contain any active ingredients to suppress the cough, 85% of the time it will work. The placebo effect is so strong, and it's not because it's in your mind. When you look in the brain, you see the cough receptors are actually suppressed because you believe this thick syrup is going to relieve it. So it doesn't contain any cough suppressant, but your belief that it does suppresses the cough receptors in your brain, and you stop coughing. There's certain kinds of knee surgery, for example, where there is a very strong placebo response. You can inject saline into the joint instead of active chemical, and the joint, and then you feel the pain goes away. So belief can change your brain
in a big way,
and it can change your body, and it can also change how you're operating in the world. Because if you believe something, you will try to do it. So if you look at examples of people who broke the 4-minute mile record when it was not broken, for the longest time. Roger Bannister broke it, and he broke it. And before that, people said it was physiologically impossible. Nobody could do it. The most masterful athletes could not break this barrier. But the moment he did, several other people did, because now they're not thinking that that's impossible. They're actually just showing up to places, and they're reaching further than they.
So interesting you use that as an example, because I admire the high achievers in the world. I've taken a lot of flack on that for social media because some of them, I guess, apparently are not liked for their personal lives or their political persuasions or whatever. But a high achiever is a high achiever in whatever field they're in. And I love them for one reason. They make me see more of what's possible. And the more, you can believe everything in your head of what you think is possible. But when you see it happen, when you see somebody do that, how inspiring is that? It's just awesome.
Well, I think I've been really, one of the things that I used to object to in social media for the longest time, and even with my team, when they would post things, they would say, well, I'm not sure that that's relatable. And I said, I don't want to be a relatable brand. I want to be aspirational. I want people to reach for more of themselves that can actually, so they can enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
Why should I say, no, you should just stay in the stagnant position? Now, I can see how there are advantages to both, but I, like you, I prefer seeing people who are far wealthier than me, people who are better looking than me. Like, why not? I don't feel like I have to compare myself in a negative way. I think it's inspiring to think about how you can change any of those dimensions in your life.
And when you talk about changing dimensions and you were talking about belief, one of the most fascinating things I saw was a clinical trial I worked on for breast cancer. And it was phase 2 clinical trial. And it was poorly structured because the primary group of women were Hispanic women that were actually big believers in God. And the placebo effect in the trial was one of the highest I've ever seen in 30 years of looking at clinical trials.
Right.
I mean, these women believe whatever you give me is curing my breast cancer. And sure enough, they had outstanding results, even though they got the placebo.
Well,
So if I didn't believe in belief then, I believe in the power of belief as a result of a science experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it doesn't surprise me because this idea. I used to run drug trials as well, and I remember when I first started doing trials for depression, the head of the department called me and said, "We need to talk." And I go, "Why?" He goes, "Because even your neutral expressions are the people in the placebo group are getting better because of how they feel when they see you." And I was like, "Well,
that's how I feel when I talk to you. It's elevating."
I feel the same. And so it's sort of like if you know that belief is that powerful, that it's not just some airy-fairy thing, that it is a way of being that accesses brain circuits to change them and potentially change your physiology, you know how powerful it is. There's a phenomenon called the miracles of Lourdes. So there are a Catholic.
What is it called? The miracle?
The miracles of Lourdes in France. So Lourdes.
Oh, Lourdes. Sorry,
Yeah.
I have limited hearing.
And I was sort of amazed to see that. So people go to this place and they engage in Catholic prayer, and the people with multiple sclerosis, with cancers, many of them become instantly healed. And so people initially said, "Look, this is too airy-fairy. Like, let's get some doctors on site and let's actually examine them." And while not all cases could be explained as unexplained, a significant number were. So that doesn't mean that belief works for everyone. What it means is if you're willing to believe, you're putting yourself in a position to potentially enhance your life. And I think we've gotten caught in this notion that we must be only rational beings. And I don't know when we started lying to ourselves about this. Like, I mean, when I think about my life, the things that often move me are things that are not rational. They're relationships. It's beauty, art.
I always think it's like a pendulum. We went from being, at one point, maybe more rational, or maybe we were more balanced, but somehow in a 5 or 7 year period due to the internet or whatever, when everyone got a voice, things got very emotional. Like facts went out the freaking window. Traditional debate that got you through Harvard Medical School. Okay. You don't debate sound science, a little more fact. That went out the window. People could say, well, this is how I feel. Well, you know what? That's great how you feel. And I'm glad you identified it as a feeling, but it doesn't mean it's a fact.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So I think that extreme caused it. And therefore people don't want it like the response to that, like the instant response is, objectivity and subjectivity got blurred in some way that we need to bring them back together, that they can coexist.
Yeah, I think they do coexist, and I agree with you on the extension of what you're saying, which is that it's fine if somebody has a different point of view. If they want to debate it, we can debate it. I'm putting together a series right now, which is sort of a series of mini movies on phenomena in medicine that people don't know about, like the controversial data on cholesterol, on antioxidants, like the other side of the story, because I want people to know the other side of the story.
Yes.
Now, if somebody says, "Well, I can't believe you're doing that because you're harm," I'm not doing it to harm anything. I think that people are in a better position if they have more information and they understand that life is not just about one thing and not the other. So in general, I agree with your sentiment that in society, we seem to have gone off the deep end where we only identify with people who think like us, which is like so absurd. You learn so much from people who are in completely different spheres. I actually reached out. I was I was going to do an interview on this Friday with someone who's a digital artist, Krista Kim, and people were like, "Why are you speaking to an artist?" I was like, "Well, I want to talk to her about the impact of art on health span and longevity and the future of humanity." And they were like, "Well, but aren't you in the medical sort of lane?" And I said, "Well, I also wrote a musical, and I've co-founded a technology company, so I'm one person, but I can have different things that I can pay attention to. And similarly, I can have different opinions, and you are more than welcome to disagree with them, and we can sit down, have a cocktail, and talk about it." But I think that kind of civility is gone because people over-identify with people who have the same opinions that they have.
And it's interesting what you also said that and I know I've struggled with in my whole life. My family used to laugh at me, and I still managed to push through, of the idea of the boxes that people want to put other people in. Maybe because they feel boxed in, they want to put you into a box. And it's like, stay in that box. Don't stay in your own lane. Don't, you are a doctor. What are you doing talking to an artist? Where does that, it's like, you're a multifaceted being. To me, this is all part of you. And the more you explore, the more interesting life gets.
Well, and I think that's going to become more and more relevant as AI begins to take over just general functions. When the boring thinking that we had to do previously, AI is going to be able to do that. So we're going to have to start becoming more integrated. We're going to have to start thinking in ways that connect different things that can assist AI so that we can use AI to produce the results we want. And so I think this general faculty in my book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, Harnessing the Power of the Unfocused Mind, I point out that unfocusing actually activates a part of the brain that is responsible for complex thinking, predicting the future, and really accessing deeper memories. So if you are doing multiple different things, it can be an advantage to your brain. It doesn't have to be a disadvantage. So we're going off in all kinds of directions here, but I think when we started with the law of attraction, really what I wanted to say was that I think there is a way in which we can increase the chances that we can draw what we want into our lives by employing belief, by imbuing intention with emotion, by directing attention to what we want, and by putting ourselves in situations where things might appear. I mentioned this recently. With in so many situations, some of the most important things in life have happened to me because of intuition. Like you're standing around, all of a sudden your intuition lights up. Or when I remember, I've told you the story before, I think, but when I was standing next to a professor at a conference, I'd just seen his talk. I was completely like blown away. I was like, what an amazing talk. And standing next to him, I said, I really loved your talk. And he said, thank you. And I said, I don't know why, but I really feel you could influence my life. And he looked at me and he goes, well, I don't know you, but what are you interested in? And I was in South Africa at the time. And I said, I'm thinking about the brain and emotion. And he goes, well, I'm at the University of Stellenbosch. We've never actually admitted anybody of color before. And we've never given this to anyone who's vaguely interested in psychiatry. But if you want, you can submit an application. If you get the scholarship, it will change your life. And so I handed to him the next day. He actually called me that afternoon and said, congratulations and welcome to Stellenbosch. Now, you could say, well, did I attract that? I think there was an unknown mechanism, which is where the word attraction comes in. There's an unknown mechanism that got employed that activated my intuition that made me ask this person this question. I have since never said to anyone in the world, I think you can influence my life. Would you like to do that? But why, in that one instance, did I say that? So I think that most people have had enough happen in their lives that's not completely linear, but that they then ignore, where they're saying, I don't know, like, how did this happen? And I think
Well,
this.
one of the things that I'd like you to elaborate on is attraction and action. You acted. There was something you said. I had an instinct,
Right.
but I acted on it, is what I heard.
Yes, and that's actually part of what this initiative. When I was saying intention should be imbued with emotion, intention is also strengthened by action.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you take small steps, so let's say you intend to make money and you take a small step and you make a little bit of money because you've taken that step, it strengthens the intention. So action and intention go hand in hand. There are two kinds of intentions when we talk about intentions in the brain. There are goal intentions, which is what most people have, like I intend to do this, I want to do this. And then there's implementation intentions. And implementation intentions are, I intend to do that by this day, and by this day I will act. So in your life, ask yourself if the things you intend for yourself are actually implementation intentions. Do you have a time? Do you have a timestamp on that? And are you planning to act? But action is actually a very, what we used to think cognition or thinking just existed only in the brain, but we now know that thinking is an embodied process. It involves, there are all kinds of really amazing examples, like people doing, a good example is when you, so in my book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, I point out that that if you walk around the block, so if you give someone a creative problem to solve, and if you walk around the block, you are statistically significantly less likely to be creative than if you free walk in zigzags, because your brain is not constrained by just so your walking changes how creative you can be. Well, it does, and we all think of our identities as being fixed as well. But when you act, like, so when I said that to him, and he said there's something at Stellenbosch, I was sort of thinking, I could have thought, if they've never given it to someone like me before, why would I even try? And that's closing the door on possibility. It's not believing. But because something in me believed it was possible, I put together an application and sent it to him. And then he took the application and presented it to people, and people said, why not? So I think that action is something. A lot of people don't act because they're uncertain. I'm seeing this, I do leadership development work as well. And I can't tell you how many people I come across who are just not willing to accept that AI is going to take over their job. They're just not willing to accept that. They're like, they have what looks to me like a delusion that it's like, what, 10,000 workers were fired, another 10,000 workers were fired. It's like, what makes you think that you are immune to getting fired unless you're doing something that is completely not replaceable. So why not think about reinventing yourself?
Mm-hmm.
This is the only thing I know how to do. Well, the self circuit in the brain, which is largely codified by the default mode network, that self circuit can be changed. There's a process called positive disintegration, which a Polish psychiatrist and psychologist talked about, where he said gifted students are constantly reinventing themselves throughout their lives. And if you think about many stars like Taylor Swift or Madonna, they had to have a different. It was like, here's Madonna's La Isla Bonita, here's Madonna's Holiday,
Yeah.
here's Madonna with Justin Timberlake. you
Yeah.
know uh, she had to reinvent herself. Reinvention is possible, and we just don't realize that we can do it, firstly, and secondly, that it can be done in a way that really augments your life. There's a term that I've come up with called psychological Halloweenism, which relates to a study that showed that if you're trying to solve a creative problem and you take on the identity of a rigid librarian, you are statistically significantly less likely to solve that problem than if you take on the identity of an eccentric poet. So you might say, well, why would that be? Because your brain is no longer telling you that your identity governs your success. Your
Mm-hmm.
ident- you are in charge of your identity, and you can change your identity whenever you want to. So anyone listening to this, ask yourself, what is my ideal self? Who, not according to anyone else, according to you. Someone who's happy, making money, healthy, feeling connected to other people. That's great. Now ask yourself, what would I most love doing? And then identify that gap between your real self right now and your ideal self. There's research that has been shown that that actually shows that Richard Boyatzis at Case Western University showed that the main reason for people not achieving their goals is because they live by what they call their real selves. The person that gets up on a Monday morning is freaked out, doesn't know where the next dollar is coming from. Most people who are successful have a really well defined idea of an ideal self. And then once they have that idea, they actually start to build it. I have, I'm on a platform called Nas.io, and I have a free ideal self questionnaire that people can take and fill it out for themselves. So it guides them through, what are my values? Like, what do I really care? Like at this point, we don't stay the same throughout our lives. We change. We decide to do different things. So the more you can give yourself permission to change the self circuit, the more likely you are to actually achieve something new and attract something different into your life.
It's very interesting, the concept of zooming in on your ideal self, because people get stuck on the word purpose. If you say to them, what's your purpose? They'll say, how the heck am I supposed to know what my purpose is? But if you shift it to, what is your ideal self? Who would that be? What would they be doing? How are they going to sleep great at night because they feel exhausted from having a wonderful day? And they're not stressed when they go to sleep at night. It's an interesting shift in a way of thinking.
Well, it is, and I think it's cool that you're bringing that up in this context, because Aristotle, when Aristotle talked about purpose, he was pretty deliberate in saying it is not the end goal. It's not to save humanity. It's not to make mechanical instruments. It's not to, like, whatever we think purpose is, that's the stuff we do to maintain our sense of purpose. But sense of purpose is really an alignment with your greatest virtues in a way that makes you feel like you are who you are. And so the question to ask yourself is, in terms of like who you are you aligned with who you are? And are you aligned with your values? Like, a lot of people don't really want to admit that, I don't really want to have to not be with people I love. I don't really want to like be told what to do. I don't, because it's hard to recognize that you value autonomy. But for me, the reason I'm optimistic about this age is, I think if you dare to be creative and you dare to believe in your agency and autonomy, you will find somewhere that will feel like home, both inside you and in the world.
I think it's such an important concept to really spend time thinking about, because I really believe, when people feel anxiety, stress, unhappiness, when they get ill, to me, there is a disconnect between who they want to be, their ideal self, what they believe, and what they're showing on the outside. I think a lot of the mental illness we're watching today in society is from social media, in the way that, people get caught up in these things and say, well, I have to say this because this is what my audience wants to hear. Or I have to do this because this is what my audience wants to hear. And I know the pain of just innocently going against that. I mean, not too many people I know can say they lost 65,000 followers in a 24-hour period and are still here to tell the tale. But so I would do the same thing again, because I was never on social media to please everybody else. I did it as something to express myself. It was my form of meditating and writing. And then I was like, okay, I'll share this with other people. And, Wilhelmina requires a photo. So that'll be the placeholder. They'll be happy and I'll be able to express myself. But that lack of being able to be true is really impacting a lot of people, I believe. They're trying to adapt to what they think somebody wants them to be, or what they think they should say, instead of, I don't know if I agree with that, or I don't know if that's how I feel.
Yeah, and if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, you will understand that initially all you're doing is paying attention to all the wonderful things that connect you, and then you start to discover stuff you don't really like, and you're not sure if you like it. But your first instinct is not to be able, I'm leaving because I don't like it. You recognize that there are things, if you get to know anybody intimately enough, we will discover things that we may not like about them. But when you discover things you don't like about someone, is that a reason to leave? And if you have a hard time thinking about that in terms of a long-term relationship, think of it in terms of friendship. I have many friends who have different political ideas, different ideas about the world, and we know enough to know that we love one another, and so why should we even talk about this? Like, I don't have a reason that they should believe what I'm thinking. What I think often is an opinion anyway. So I'm entitled to my opinion, and they're entitled to theirs, and we are entitled to a friendship where there's a lot of enjoyment, because we don't have to talk about the politics all of the time.
Right. Exactly. And it's funny when you talk about relationships and long-term relationships. A friend of mine was I'll just say, a high-profile sports referee, was on the road a lot. And he was in like his second or third, maybe fourth year of marriage, had little kids already at home. And one day he was in the locker room complaining about something. And the head of all the referees was in the room and pulled him aside and said, listen, if you're going to last in this industry, you're going to need that wife at home, because you're going to be on the road a certain amount of days a year, and then you're going to be home exhausted, and you're going to hope you have somebody taking care of the family and everything. And he said, so the next time I hear you say anything, before you say anything negative, including to your wife, before you say one thing negative to her, I want to know you said 25 positive things first.
Yeah, absolutely.
He said, and then next day, before you say anything negative, I want you to do the same thing. He goes, and then I know you'll last in this industry, but otherwise you won't make it. And I actually just went to his retirement 35 years later.
That's amazing. And it's a great example of how a lot of what we think is not it. Like, we do have some autonomy. Like, we can choose to focus on positive things about people. We can choose to feel better about it. We don't have to lie about it, and sometimes it's impossible. But I think it's good to know that we have the power to change our brains and to change what we want to pay attention to. So a lot of times people will say to me, oh, what do you think about the state of the world? And I was like, I don't know, it's pretty amazing. And they would be like, how can you say the world is amazing when there's so many wars and political? I said, well, I mean, if you're asking me, is there enough going on that I could feel miserable? The answer is absolutely yes. there's enough. But my brain is not a trash can. I,
Right.
I don't want to just fill it with all kinds of things that make me miserable because I don't want to feel miserable.
Very protective of the rental apartments in here.
Right.
There are only so many of them. I can
Right.
only fill them with people I want as neighbors. That's how I
Yeah.
look at it. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, gotta go.
Yeah. And so,
Too expensive. You can't afford the rent.
yeah. And I do all kinds of sort of slightly absurd things to understand the state of the world, but it entertains me. I've had this, I don't even know why I'm going there because this is such an absurd thing. But one way that I get to understand the state of the world is by looking at the Billboard Top 100 for music. And for some reason, I deduce so many things about the way the world works that and I was like, who is this art? Like I went this morning to the Billboard charts and I looked at them and I was like, I haven't heard of this artist before, and I follow music very closely. So I was like, "Oh, I wonder who this is." So I clicked on the artist's name, clicked on the music video, and it basically said presented by, and it was a credit card. And I was like, I see. So something about banking is connecting with something in music and art. And we know people on Wall Street are investing in music labels. So there's a shift. Like I could never explain the shift in the economy if if I saw an article in it, I would ignore it because it would bore me. But because I can deduce this from how I'm looking at the Billboard Top 100, I feel like, oh, wow, it's kind of a fun place to get your news because you just see how songs are doing,
I love it.
but you're also able to deduce things about, how it made me ask questions to another friend the other day. I was like, how did this artist like get into the top 10? Like what? And he's a musician, and he was like, oh, that's a TikTok phenomenon. I was like, what do you mean? Like anybody can be on TikTok? They were like, no. What they do is they pay creators, and creators put the music of the recording studio behind their whatever they can be talking about
Oh,
spinach.
yes, behind their
Yeah.
silly thing.
Yeah, and then there's a button that says add to Spotify, and it gets counted as a download or as interest.
Oh
So
my gosh.
so it's fascinating just to understand how the world works. I will never understand the macro picture. I always have intuitions about it, but I do think you have to lead with a solid intention of like, do I want to feel miserable or do I want to feel great? Because if you want to feel miserable, there's more than enough going on. You're all set. But
I hear you.
if you want to
Right.
feel
If you
great,
want to ruminate all day, if you want to
right,
ruminate on misery all day, just remember you can ruminate on wonderful things all day too.
completely. Yeah. Yeah. I actually was I contributed to a piece in the Fort Worth Daily recently, and I loved the topic. The topic was on designed indulgence, and the whole idea that, and there's a whole literature showing that indulgence can actually help. It can help you lose weight. It can help you stick to a healthier diet. If you're there, a lot of people put themselves in these very punitive positions, and they're constantly doing negative things to themselves, and then they feel better because they're not feeling as guilty. But
Right.
I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that there are positive physiologic advantages to indulgence. And if you can design them so that they feel that they're according to your taste, you can then structure indulgence into your life. And when you're on your deathbed, you're going to definitely say, I'm glad I designed a few indulgences.
Oh my gosh. If I didn't have to stop us because I know you have someplace to go, I could keep this going for another 2 hours. So we're just going to have to do it again, Srini.
I would love it. Thanks so
I
much for having me, Dan.
It's such a pleasure. I have been speaking with Dr. Srini Pillay. He's got a new course out on the law of attraction. So you are going to want to check into that. There'll be plenty of links right below this podcast in the descriptor where you can find his website, you can find his books, and all the really cool things he's doing because he seems to endlessly come up with new ways to kind of reinvent and explore and continue to dig deeper and shine brighter as the diamond that he is, as he encourages all of us to do the same. So thank you, Dr. Palle.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's wonderful being with you as always.
Thank you. I'm going to be moving over to the green room with Srini. This has been the Silver Expedience Perception Dynamics podcast. I'm Diane Russell, your host, and I really want to thank you for tuning in. Please hit subscribe and check out every link below. Talk to you soon. See you soon. Bye-bye.